Donc bienvenue dans la taverne. Aujourd'hui, on va se retrouver avec les créateurs d'une nouvelle règle pour la période de la Révolution. Donc c'est une règle de wargame un petit peu particulière. Donc on va voir avec les créateurs de suite. Donc c'est Works Miniature. Ils sont ensemble là avec nous. Et donc ils sont du Canada, il me semble, si je ne me trompe pas. Et ils vont nous présenter leurs règles, la spécificité de leurs règles, pourquoi un peu ils ont choisi de faire cette règle, etc. Donc, hello together, hello.
Hello.
Hi. Salut.
On comprend plus de français, mais on va parler en anglais.
Yes.
Sounds good?
Yeah.
So, yes, donc ils parlent un petit peu français, mais on va faire cette interview en anglais parce que c'est plus facile pour eux. Et donc, moi, je vais traduire par la suite leurs propos. Donc, pour commencer, vous pouvez peut-être vous introduire chacun et parler un peu de votre parcours comme joueur et plus généralement comme créateur. So, hello, I would like to introduce yourself talk about your background and to player and also to creator of rules, perhaps, to start.
Great. Yeah, I love the two languages. That's very Canadian. And that means anything political takes twice as long to say. And
Yep.
if you understand both languages like we kind of do, like that means you listen to the same thing twice. And it's actually the best thing ever to make sure that no one pays attention to like what's going on in politics. Because everyone's like, no, like
Here we go again.
So yeah, like anyway. So yeah, I guess I'll start.
Sure.
I started wargaming when I was like in middle school. Like I think a lot of kids, like we had an older friend that was like interested in Warhammer. So like I was like less interested, but I'm more interested in games, right? And I was more interested in video game strategy, like Red Alert and stuff like that. So you know, I got a little bit of that. But I didn't really find the game to be that very interesting. And certainly like our friends didn't. So like they basically, you know, did the normal thing, like they bought a couple of things and then they stopped. But I kind of remembered that. And my father was always very interested in like models. So when Flames of War first edition was released, I was really excited about that to like actually play it. And I got really involved in like making sure that was like a project in our like in a because don't come from the city. I come from like kind of the outside the city. So I was involved in promoting like the very first edition, like the very first books. And yeah, like I really like that. I will say that the people like in my community didn't all like it as much. So after a couple of years of that, like you know, to be able to play, like Flames of War wasn't that popular, so I had to kind of play Warhammer, and then I finally kind of like started playing Warhammer more seriously. And I got involved in the tournament scene and all that. But as soon as I went to university, I started running kind of like clubs for that kind of thing. And it turned out that a lot of us were more interested, especially like in the capital in Ottawa, were more interested in historicals, right? And
Okay.
historicals, especially in around the capital of Canada, are very, very common and very organized, right? So my deep wargaming experience in historicals does come from like Flames of War, both from first all the way to third edition. But after that, I got very involved in playing and testing Sam Mustafa's game. And you may have noticed that our last Kickstarter was also like with Mustafa. Like we basically released a free upgrade and like update of Mind Reason, one of his original games. We said, you know, a lot of people when they have a Kickstarter, especially with miniatures, it's kind of easy to like release, you know, a PDF rules and like say these are our rules, right? But instead we said, you know what, we actually don't think we can do this better. So instead we worked with Sam to kind of just do a free update. And we just called it the tournament pack, although it's kind of just a general update without changing the rules too much. and we helped him promote his old game. And that kind of comes from my experience again as a video game kind of modder as well, right? Like you don't have to like reinvent the wheel every time. You can just kind of participate in the community. So we've always been very community centric. And yeah, after doing all that, like I started getting involved more in rules development. But I think we'll leave that for the actual project. So how about yourself?
Yeah. So I'm Cynthia. This is Tyler. I don't think you said your name.
What?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I guess we've been talking a lot like online. So
Yeah, but
yeah.
and yeah, so I first started playing more, like my first adventure, I guess, in gaming was more with like Dungeons and Dragons, board games and things like that. But then after participating and running like in our first like D&D campaign, I actually invited Tyler to it, and like as a reciprocate, so in return, he invited me to a Flames of War tournament. So that was actually my first wargaming experience. And ever since, I've never looked back. But that was the first time. I started when I was, I believe, 19 years old, so second year university. Um, Once I really got into wargaming, so again, first thing was Flames of War, and I think I probably played, Sam Mustafa's games as well. At a certain point, I decided that, it's something that I actually enjoy so much that I created my own university club at the university I was at. It was actually under the engineering department, and I found that a lot of young engineering students were very interested in wargaming. And it makes sense, it is a very strategic hobby. It has a lot of elements that, especially, well, both historical actually and anything that's, sci-fi is very closely linked to engineering and things like that. So that was, I would say, when I started getting serious about it, just running the community and introducing wargaming to other people and, students and things like that. And now we have been partnering us both in life, but also now on this new project.
For sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Very exciting.
So finally, you start together. One of you start by fantasy game, and another one you start directly by historic game.
That's
Yeah, I
correct.
would say so. Yeah, I've played um what's it called, Infinity. That's the only game I played seriously that was not historical, but
That was
other than
after.
that, and that was after too, so it's, for me, it's been historical all the way.
Okay. So the
Yeah.
second question: how to you pass to the player to creator? Why you want to create your rules, and why don't stay just a player?
Yeah, I guess I'll start with that in the sense we were both really involved in kind of those free community projects, especially. I mean, I think it's fair to say that a lot of wargamers like we like when we were running our different clubs, like we were playing like war games like more than once a week for
Mhm.
like years, right? So when you've played enough war games, you kind of have that idea that you're going to do your own thing. Both of us have like kind of a technical background. I also have a policy background, so we write and we like to think of like those sorts of like technical concepts, right? So I think it's like a natural transition. And the only big difference was that like our idea was coming more from like how to promote historical war games to kind of a more modern audience, right? Because our experience in like all our kind of communities in different cities was always like really like being in public and being like not really associated with like retail stores, but more with like clubs, which is actually a rarer concept in North America. Like it's more common in Europe, right?
Mhm.
And a lot of like university exposure as well, right? So we just immediately realized that like people were looking for different things and that a different kind of person was increasingly getting involved in wargaming, but especially historical wargaming. I think the thing that I often mention to people is that anybody that we met under 25 that was interested in this sort of thing, like they actually didn't know what Games Workshop was, right? Like,
No.
and it's not that because we all know that Games Workshop is very successful right now. It's just that the sort of people interested in like historical wargaming that will come up to the table like and be very kind of like outgoing. They probably played like Europe Universalis or like maybe even War Thunder, World of Tanks. Like there's a different source of like these sorts of gaming oriented people, and they're very committed. Like in some ways, they're more committed, right? Like what's the average?
Yeah, they
What's
already
the
have
average?
2,000 hours
Yeah, like
on video
Heartspiring
games.
or something, right? Like so we really started to tap into that more and more, and that's kind of where we started because we had a lot of intermediate projects. We had the project that we did like an update for Sam's rule set, Mind and Reason, which you can still get on his Facebook page. But we also had a big digital like during COVID because of the lockdown, especially for universities,
Mm-hmm.
we had a huge mod that was very active for free, of course, to do Mind and Reason online. But instead of just, you know, like a scenario, we created a modular
With
tournament,
Tabletop
yeah,
Simulator.
with Tabletop Simulator, like a modular game creation system. So you could basically do the same thing. I think Infinity did something very similar that was also very successful, but obviously they're a much bigger group where it's like you can kind of modularly like pick your map, pick your
Mm-hmm.
armies, and like go right away, right?
Okay.
So we did that as like an intermediate project, and we just started thinking more and more is like, well, what could we really do? Because
What else can we do?
yeah, like certainly you more than me were like interested in like scripting and coding. So
Yep.
part of doing that for Tabletop Simulator was we actually it's a scripted mod. It's not just like assets. It actually deploys.
We had all the
assets.
counters. We had
Yeah.
all the like. We started doing things on Tabletop Simulator that actually made the game play faster than in
Yeah,
person.
it was programmed. Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, so it was a natural progression to be like, what else can we do? So, you know, between having ideas of like in terms of game design, plus I guess from my end more so in terms of how do we optimize gameplay? How do we make tabletop wargaming more engaging?
Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily just faster in terms of actual time, but in terms of how many things are you able to do per minute? You know, like are you engaged? Are you thinking the whole time? Are you able to feel like you're in the game the whole time instead of just waiting around or looking through rule books, you know,
Mm-hmm. Yes.
and like that.
Yeah, the takeaway, I guess, to launch into the game itself is we were thinking, you know, because we actually don't necessarily like when people just have like PDF rules and that's it. We just realized even like older players, like they're on their phones all the time looking at tables for war games, even old war games, right? Like even I see General Dominate 2, like people are like looking at their phones all the time when they're playing that, even when they're older, right? So the
Mm-hmm.
question wasn't, oh, should there be phones? Because everyone's on their phones,
Yes.
right? The question is,
How do we make it efficient?
how do we make it better, right? Like, how do you not just have this be like a cost saving thing? How do you bring things that the phone can do that the tabletop can't do? And so, as we'll get into it, the game does more than just kind of contain information. Like, it's much more advanced than anything that, like, say, Infinity or Games Workshop has created, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it's basically like a live GM, and the game is simultaneous. So people are doing orders simultaneously. And so that's why we naturally went for Musket era, more not just because we're interested in it, but because it's the idea that you can really grab onto is like, oh, people are like sending out orders to their commanders on the battlefield. And there's like almost a time element of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we could really do something where the app can do more for you and bring more to the tabletop that puts you in the historical lens, the historical perspective, right? We didn't want it to just be gamey. We wanted it to be something that actually makes it more immersive historically.
Okay. Yes, super. You start to donc la question que j'avais posée, c'était en gros pourquoi ils étaient passés de joueurs à créateurs. Donc, vous avez commencé un peu à l'évoquer, puisque vous avez parlé des mousquets. Peut-être vous pouvez parler un peu plus de la période que vous avez choisie pour cette règle, parce que c'est une période assez spécifique de l'histoire, qui est en lien avec l'histoire de France. Donc, je vous laisse un petit peu développer. So, talk about the era you choose for your game, because you start to talk about the muskets. So it's a Black Powder era. So which one is especially?
For sure. I think I'll talk more about that in the sense that I do more of the historical research. And not just me, but like it's kind of part of the Tundra work side. I myself participated in both. I'm involved in the rules writing, but also in Tundra Works. Cynthia is like the lead developer, and like in charge of basically like all the game stuff, right?
Mhm.
But like in the middle of that, like, when you're doing miniatures, like our miniatures are all heavily researched, right? Like, so naturally there's like a research element in that. And so the historical periods are something that I'm more comfortable, and certainly my partner at Tundra Works is more comfortable kind of playing in and thinking about and like imagining like what we could do and why, right? And we have lots of period that we're interested in. Um, this is definitely not coming next, but we always joke about doing like the Napoleon 3 game, right? Like and it would be just a picture of him at like the end of like the war, the Franco-Prussian War. Like the partner at Tundra Works is actually very interested in that period of like French politics and history. Yeah, like so we're interested in a lot of things, right? But the reason we picked Revolution was because we are very, very comfortable with 1700 to 1800 musket era, which is to most people would be the core. We've played a lot of that, right? We've played Mind Reason a lot.
LaSalle.
Yeah, LaSalle, like a lot of Sam's games, and he also is overly focused, I would say, on musket era. I think there's something there, and something that we've talked about. There's a lot of content in, say, like World War II, right?
Mhm.
Um, and that means that there's almost more room to create something different in the musket era, right? And then same idea for Revolution. Obviously, like I'm just particularly interested in that era. Like I've read a lot about it. But we also just see like there's a lot of room, right? Like it's an era that like I think anyone who's interested in Napoleonics
Yes.
should be able to be interested in Revolution, because the revolutionary period, which a lot of people say it's the same thing. Like when you say you're interested in Napoleonics, you're probably like you're not going to say that you're not going to play like Marengo, right?
Mm.
Like it's not that you're not interested in anything before like the Napoleonic Empire, right? Like after he crowns himself emperor. It's just a lot of the rule sets, almost all of them, I would say. Like there are definitely some new ones coming out, but the classical rule sets for the Napoleonic era don't really focus on the Revolutionary era.
Mm.
And so we thought that the game would be a particularly good opportunity to do that, because what I think is really different and really interesting about the Revolutionary era is in the Napoleonic era, like at Wagram, right? You have two armies, and they're both often thinking the same way. Yes, they have different ideas, but the way the armies have been trained, everyone is trying to follow Napoleon, right? They're all
Mm.
trying to like follow like what, because it's been a while, right? They're all trying to catch up to Napoleon. And
We're learning.
by the time of a lot of the famous battles, their tactics are very similar, right? At
Mm.
the end of the day, right?
Unpredictable.
Yeah, like and we often joke that LaSalle 1 is a very good simulation, but only for like the late Napoleonic period, because everyone is just running columns of conscripts into each other because
Yes.
it does become kind of that, right? But in the revolutionary period, not only do you have the French not having perfected this kind of warfare, but you have other armies that aren't really trying to imitate them. In fact, they think that what they're doing doesn't make sense, and they're trying to do something completely different, right? Their drill books are often trying to do something completely different. And so when you have an app that has simultaneous orders, we want to really play on that by having the Austrians trying to do like linear warfare, and not just in a way that like is historical imitation, but the app and the game itself will shape your behavior or encourage you to do things that they would try to do,
Mm.
right? They're trying to do something so different, right? Like in the Austrian army, for instance, has a lot of abilities or cards that's like encourage you to do like oblique 45-degree angle movements, right? Whereas the French have a lot of column movement and things like that. So you can really differentiate, right? The
Mhm.
armies. And I think it's not just like, oh, that's cool, which, because people do want that. They do want different, gameplay experiences.
Yes.
Uh, but there's a real historical reason for that, right? So it's just a really good period. And the last thing I want to say is that in a lot of ways, the revolutionary period is more open-ended and more global, right? So there's, there's Wellington in India, right? In this period, and that's important, right? There's things going on in Haiti. There's, the Americans and the French almost had a war. Like they were very close to having a war, right? So not only is there a lot in history directly that's like to play with, whereas, in Napoleonics, it's often limited to just Europe. But there's even more you can imagine that's like very historically plausible. It's like, well, what if
Alternate history.
yeah, what if something like was slightly different, like in the Vendée campaign, right?
Yes.
What if something was slightly different in the Pyrenees campaign? Like nobody talks about that, but it's very plausible. And something we'll be digging out for the Kickstarter is that there's a map, I think, from the First Coalition, which is a map of how all the imperial powers wanted to partition France. But it's like a very like silly map, right? But it's also very close to like what could have happened. And then it's very easy to imagine like different things from that, right? So we want to do both. We want to engage people in a new era of history, but we also want to give them a period of history that we find is like very fun to play in.
Yes. Okay, super.
I guess we can just walk through
Yep.
it maybe.
Great.
Yes.
Yeah, so in general, it's once we get the game going, you'll notice that in terms of what's happening on the tabletop, it's practically the same as a lot of games that people are familiar with. You're still moving your miniatures on the table, you're still rolling dice on the table. And it is more of a card-based miniature war game. But the phone, the app is here to drive the game forward, and it's also replacing the rule book and the GM. But in general, you start your phone. Again, we started with on appareil, so one device, or it can also be played with two devices connected over the internet. And you'll see in a sec why that could be important. But for now, we're just gonna do one device to walk through. What country should we pick?
Autriche.
Autriche?
Mhm.
Okay. But yeah, so you can kind of pick around, like this is just the setup. You put together your army. Let's do Charles.
But he wasn't an archduke back then. We have to look at that.
Uh-oh.
But then people will know who he is if we don't say he's Archduke Charles.
Not yet. Let's just put together like a general list.
So just for the people. Donc là, en fait, elle est en train de choisir le général, donc l'armée, le général, et elle est en train de composer son armée. Voilà.
And same thing, do a French army. Let's just go with that. Napoleon to be.
Et donc là, le deuxième joueur fait pareil avec, pareil, il choisit ses brigades, etc. Et après, vous allez voir qu'on peut aller choisir les unités, etc.
Yeah, I was just gonna say you can see that like in theory there's almost unlimited space to like add different generals and troops. And so right, it's not even really about the space. It's like we'll be thinking a lot about just cleanliness, right? Like what's the things we can add, but in theory we can add almost anything, right? We can add as many generals as we want, and they all have slightly different profiles.
Yes.
Yeah, so these are the ones we currently have, but doesn't mean we're limited to it. So that's the army setup page. In general, so again, I do want to mention we are currently in beta testing. So this is the working app we have right now. It does play seamlessly, but in terms of the layout, what it looks like could change in the future as we develop. And hopefully we'll add in some cool arts, make it more appealing visually. But right now it's just buttons and text.
Oui,
Okay.
et l'appareil français, c'est plus comme un alpha. It's even less developed, but on va essayer.
Yeah. So every turn starts. So these are more standard. So fusillade, shooting. It's just a shooting turn. Whatever's on the table, you roll dice, you do your thing. Everything here is mostly for information. It gives you like their information about a individual unit.
Stats, yeah.
Stats. Stats a French word?
I think so. It's the statistique. That's French.
Uh,
I don't know what's the colloquial like the standard term for like unit stats en français.
Unit stats.
mhm.
I think you can translate by capacité
Yeah,
d'unité ou caractéristique
yeah,
d'unité.
yeah,
Statistic.
yeah. There's
I think it,
options.
I think it's unit stats. It's okay. The
In
people.
Canada, it's even worse because if you ask someone from Montreal, they'll be like stats.
Stats.
Yeah.
No, it's
Yeah.
okay.
So this is just for checking, but basically, shooting happens first. That's something we like from other games, right?
Mhm.
The
Mm.
idea that like your units are moving around, and especially when they're simultaneous, but then they all kind of have their own shooting, and you don't control it, right? So there'll be lots of surprises in the shooting phase.
Yeah.
Mm.
And again, like until now, the app is only here mostly as a rule book and a quick check. So we haven't gone into the real like functionalities yet. Like for now, until this phase, it's just, replacing you having to look through a book and
Mm.
obviously can check other things like you can look more deeply into the rules and whatnot if you want to.
Mm-hmm.
But then we move to the exciting one. So the next scene is, I guess I haven't translated that yet.
No, it's
But the next scene is where things get more interesting. So um this phase is like an order assignment. So this is when you see your cards and then you plan what you want to do. But this is happening secretly. So when you have one device, one person would plan. So they would take the device, they will look at it, they will choose the cards they want to play, they will assign orders. So right now, like you have the three um brigades that you've chosen.
Yeah.
So that's your army, and then you're going to say, without going deep into the rule, but in general, we're like, we want the avant-garde to do a
Oblique. Yeah, an oblique maneuver.
yeah, and we want the hussars to also do something.
okay.
So you're planning your turn. But this is happening secretly. So if we're playing, you don't see me
Yeah.
doing
Mm.
this.
Yes.
And you don't know what I haven't planned.
No.
And after I confirm it, I give it to you, and then the other player would plan their order secretly as well. And when you have two devices, this will happen simultaneously. So that also makes the game way faster.
Mm.
So yeah, so we will be doing this, I will have my phone and you will have yours, and we will plan our thing.
Yeah, and because I'm a conscript and possibly a politician, not a general in the early coalition, I'm going to use all of the blue click links, right? So the
Mm.
game also has, instead of just I'm reading I'm reading rules and I'm not sure what they are, instead of looking up what a rule means, the game will have the advantage that like a real game engine has, like not just an app, where you can click through links to see definitions and index them, right? So that's
Okay.
another like big advantage that like it's not just a rule PDF. It's something that's bringing new functionality, right? Like new accessibility to the games. Answer your question.
Okay.
Um, basically, um, because some commanders we know a lot about, but some we really don't know about. So we created like a rough class system for commanders and all that really does is it helps organize the commander list.
Mm-hmm.
And basically like the core of the commander difference is that they have a different amount of activation points per turn, right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
like a Cavalier commander, like if they're in the Cavalier class,
Mm-hmm.
uh, they have more points at the start of the game and less at the end of the game, right? And
Mm.
so creating classes, it just allows everyone to know, like, because the reality is, if we rated all the commanders separately, you would just have to memorize which was good at what, but they would probably be, similar, right? Like two cavalry commanders would have to have a similar attitude in some cases, right? So
Yes.
instead of kind of rating them individually, we created classes like little boxes to put them in. And then we created a couple extra things on top of that just for them, right?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Person. Yeah.
So yes, I start for that. So you can perhaps continue the presentation when each player, donc chaque joueur a choisi ses cartes, a mis un peu en fonction de ce qu'il voulait faire. So now what's next? Which player choose?
So after both players have put in their order in secret, yeah, I was looking. So after each player has put in their order in secret, the app takes all that information, and that's where it's basically acting as the GM. So it comes in and then it arranges it in a certain order. There are rules to that, but we're not gonna get deep into it right now. But it puts the orders together, arranged in a certain order, and now it starts showing what happens next. So, for example, I go to next, I'll push. Oh, it's in English. Hello. And we can go back to the saves game. So, relaunching now in French.
Tu peux changer l'angle
Ouais.
quand tu veux.
Yeah.
Yes. Super.
Prochain, we have the first order. So, was I playing? No, you were playing French.
Sure.
So that was yours. I couldn't remember who's
Yeah.
who. But see, at this point, me, the British player or Austrian player, my bad, I know. Me, the Austrian player, is surprised because I did not know what he did, and suddenly I'm surprised by your these are line demi brigade LND. There's a way to reference that as well. If we look at your army, actually, you are player 2. But yeah, so the demi-brigade, the ligne. It's like now they are
Well, they're
doing
going to
something.
activate first, right? So
Yeah.
generally every card, and it depends how expensive the card is in terms of command points, will do more or less. So like cheap cards are more likely to go first, but they usually have a disadvantage, right? So the unit in this case will have a less strong shooting phase, right?
Later.
And it just represents them rushing forward. And this isn't completely random. Obviously, there's a game balance element to this. But in general, we actually looked at like what's in the drill manuals and what's, the behavior of the armies and the accounts, and said, well, which of these actions is something that's like likely to be intuitive or automatic for that brigade, right? And if it is something like this, which is just represents, a surge of enthusiasm for like the French column, then it's more likely to happen first, right? And no matter how well, you plan something, generally, like it doesn't, if there's like an impulsive rush, like that goes first, right? So it's actually programmed to have events happen in a reasonably historical order, right?
Yeah. So at this point, if we're playing an actual game on the tabletop, he would, do his movements, do his charges, do whatever he needs to do on the tabletop for this unit right now.
Okay.
And if he charges me before I'm able to react because his order came up first, then that's the consequence, and the Austrians would just have to try to fight them off.
Yeah, and let's see what happens next to kind of see like it's
and then at this point, which I personally didn't know either, because again, this is all in the app. I'm like, okay, now my Hussar, who has this card, can now respond in some way, like on the tabletop.
Yeah, but if the card like this one is a defensive boost, if my line unit, it's probably more likely if it was like a French cavalry unit went and charged that unit first and it's gone, or it may have for whatever reason it may not be able to use the card ability, let alone the activation, right? And so immediately you have a situation where there's a lot more command friction and kind of battlefield chaos, but this is also happening faster, right? Like this is a faster way to play, right?
Yeah, like if I had a grand plan, but because my order didn't come up first, and the unit that I wanted to do things is now not in the right position, or worse, they're already gone, then my grand plan is wasted. Yeah.
Yeah, and so we would just go through the orders.
Yeah, so basically this goes, and in this case it has been back and forth, but it could also be, two French cards come up first, and then Austrian cards come up after. Let's see. Yeah, see, in this case, the French will get to do two things in a row before the Austrians is able to respond in some way.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And so a lot could happen and a lot could be different by the time you come to like a late order, right? And the last thing that determines this, especially because some of these have the same cost, is the timer. And this will be optional, but again, this isn't just, for no reason. In general,
Yeah,
we
we
want
can
you when
skip
you're,
to
yeah,
that.
let's go back to the next order phase.
So there's like a top right corner there. There's a timer going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
So basically the timer will determine, like, so if you send out an order that has roughly the same like level of complexity at the
Mm-hmm.
same time as your opponent, it kind of like does like a coin toss, like it's random who goes first, right? But
Okay.
if you took a lot longer to send out your order, then you will probably go second,
Mhm.
even if it's the same level of
Yeah, it's a
complexity.
probability that's
Yeah.
done by the app, but yeah, in general, it takes the time that you've locked in your order,
Mm-hmm.
and it puts them in order,
Yeah.
preferring orders that are locked in first,
And that,
which
like,
makes
again,
sense.
it not only is it like an interesting, different thing, it also
Mhm.
encourages players to go through faster. Most importantly, it puts you in the lens of a commander because no matter how much time you think you have as a commander, you don't know what your opponent is doing, and it's all happening in real time. And we really want to focus again on the historical perspective of if you were a divisional commander, like what would you be thinking about? Well, you'd be thinking about who do I send orders to? What are they doing? And can the messenger get there in time?
Mhm.
Okay.
Right?
Great.
And that's something that other games don't represent well, but we can really bring that to the table is like the concept of time, not just like the literal timing, but how that affects decision making,
Yeah, it's the
right?
urgency that you feel as a player in the lens of a commander.
Absolutely. So the timing, it doesn't make or break the game and it will be optionable, but it's a really good example of what you can add to the tabletop game with an
Yes.
app,
Yeah.
right? And it's a
Yeah.
historical feature,
Yeah.
right?
I mean,
Okay.
that's basically the game.
Yeah, it's actually
So
very
it's actually pretty
straightforward.
simple.
It's straightforward, but it's compressing a lot of things that you would normally have to like look through the rule book and like look through the phases instead of
Mhm.
looking through like the chart of like the order of
Can
operations for the
also,
game.
yeah, can also look
Yeah,
at what cards is currently in play because some of them
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
has like an
it's
effect
all
that
there.
can, last an extra turn. It's just all these little things that hopefully help the game go faster and
Yeah, it's all those kind of
make it
like
easier.
little features, enhancements that only an app can really do that
Mhm.
we learned from our time like putting out like free kind of products,
Yeah,
right?
and from video games.
Yeah, and from video
Mhm.
games, right?
Mhm.
So we're trying to take features and bring them back to the tabletop in a way that benefits the tabletop game.
Okay, super. And like perhaps the people like the people start to show, but after the movement phase and you have the shoot, and after the shoot you have the other phase, and it's cool because you don't lost any phase because the people are like guided by
Yeah,
the appli, so you can lose something because finally you pass every check of the different
yeah,
phase, and that is cool for that also because sometimes when you are in the game you lost something, one rules, or I forget something, some that.
mhm.
So in this case I think it's not possible because you have the appli to put you on the
Yeah. It's a
It
reminder,
reminds people.
and,
Yeah.
and again, that's what I mean between it's just information on your phone versus it's guiding you. It's kind of like a quiet like game master that's just
Mhm.
there guiding you constantly through the game. And we'll get into this more later, but this adds all sorts of other effects. It means that solo play is much more possible, right? Like there's a lot of features for solo play, right?
Mhm.
Yes.
And we won't be showing it today, but it's not just that the basic game is good for solo play, but we can add like a primitive AI like very easily, right?
Mhm.
Mhm.
And
Yeah,
perhaps you can talk also about your news. I see because you in the beginning when you send me the apply, it's just one player, and after you had
yeah,
two players
Oh,
in two
okay.
different mobile phone. I think it's that
yeah.
like
I
plusieurs
mean, you
appareils.
can run the game on your phone
Let
just
me
to
pull out
see.
But
my phone. This is not how you do tech tests. Let me pull out my phone right now, and it will
but
totally work.
just for the
Yeah,
people know
hopefully.
they
If it
can play.
doesn't work, you can cut it.
No,
Look
no,
at
but
this.
the
Live
idea is
news.
you try to
I
work
mean,
for
this is
that.
the brilliance of this, right? Though, so yeah, let's do that. Let's
Yeah,
try
let's
that.
try it. So the multiplayer is very new. In terms of development, it will definitely be there in the final game, but it is more work in progress, right?
Yes, but the
Yeah, and we do
idea to
have a
say the people
partnership.
they can
Go
play
ahead.
in two telephone, and
Yeah.
and I think
Yeah,
it's cool also to have every to have two phone. Yes. So yes, I think you.
Yep, so I
present-
host the game. It's pretty intuitive. So this is only in English right now, but obviously it will be bilingual later
Yeah, and
as
we
well.
have a partnership that we're going to announce, but we have a partnership with like a certain networking service company for this game engine. Because again, this isn't like the App Store. This is a game engine, right?
Yeah.
Super.
So what lobby am I joining? Because I see three.
So it's number 2377. There's a
Two,
lobby
seven,
ID.
seven.
Yeah.
All right.
It joins the game.
Is it
Player
working?
duh. Oh, I
Player
didn't even
dev.
change my name, but yeah, player duh.
That's what I came up with in the time allotted.
All right,
Super.
let's just start a new game, but I can also load a safe
Oh,
game.
okay. You can.
Cool.
Super.
But for now, you know what? Let's load a safe. What if
Yeah.
that breaks it?
Oh,
We'll see.
is it gonna break it?
Let's load. So this is the game that we were playing single player, but now I'm
Okay.
like, let my friends join in.
Yeah, and a very important part of this while she loads it is, and this was very important to us, right?
Yeah.
If your network fails, like if your internet goes down or something, oh, good.
Great.
Um,
Super.
Yeah, if your network fails,
Yes.
so yeah, it still connects. But if your network fails, then you can always bring your save game back to single player.
Okay.
So that was like always 100% our focus in this. Number one priority for developing this was that you don't lose your game halfway through a game. Because that's a good example of something that if you weren't programming this as a tabletop player, you wouldn't really understand. It's like, oh, well, I have a disconnect from World of Tanks.
Hmm.
Well, whatever. I'm gonna join a new game.
Yes.
If you're in person and you're like, I've been playing for like an hour or 2 hours. Our games are usually shorter too. It's like 2 hours is kind of long, but you want to have a backup plan, right? And it may not even be our fault. It could be, like the power goes out, right? Which actually happened to us in an event. The power went out. Well, you can then just take the save to a single device and then always just keep going, right?
Yeah.
It saves auto saves every single phase,
And go back.
right?
Now you're back to single. But
Okay.
yeah, so you can always go back and forth.
So you present all the part of the game and the interest of the game. The people know Sam Mustafa game. I think we
Some
see
similarities, yeah.
some similarity, like the card, for example. And you perhaps you could talk about also the miniature because it's Thunderworks miniature, perhaps.
Sure. Just briefly, yeah. Like I think again, we'll be sending a lot of material, and we're racing to put out as much material as possible for this weekend, because we are launching the Kickstarter this weekend. And the idea is like we delivered our last Kickstarter early, which is
Mhm.
that's crazy, right? Delivering a Kickstarter early, we delivered a few months early, partly so that we could support our local convention because we're very focused on gaming communities and we love to support more gaming communities outside of Canada, right? Like we want to be able to go and talk to other organizers like ourselves and be like, okay, you have a group, you want to grow your group, let's like support you, right? Like we really like to think about how to grow the community. So all to say, like we're going to be supporting our local convention by kind of bringing out a lot of new cool stuff and playing this game as a tournament, like in a multiplayer setting. But in terms of the models, which again, everyone's excited about the models. The basics for TundraWorks is that we're very focused on creating models in a setting, like basically in historical periods that are underrepresented. So the first one we did was the Seven Years' War, which again is not crazy uncommon, but there was a lot missing, right? And we always put the reason we do Kickstarter is because we always want to put out full lines, right? So you find a lot of miniature companies, they kind of like release five, six models at a time. And that's fine, but like our miniatures, which are pewter, like they're the kind of classic kind of luxury metal, like lead-free pewter. Um, we want to make sure, just because we're gamers, that what you have and what you can order in the catalog is everything you need to play the game, right? Whether it's our game or a different game. So they're very large catalogs, and for the Kickstarters, they're the last Kickstarter was easily hundreds of sculpts, right? Like I can't count them, right? Like it's tons of sculpts. Um, and for things, we like to try to bring in things that people don't have. So we brought in a kind of late 1700s, early 1800s Ottoman period,
Mhm.
right? army that, because like a lot of the times you see the Ottomans that are being used are actually like kind of 100 years too late. Like they're the ones with like the traditional like tall Janissary hats. But in reality, by that time, that the Janissaries looked quite different. So we created a new Janissary line, like we created a new Ottoman line, right? There's like all sorts of exotic cavalry and stuff. And so yeah, Revolution will be the similar. So it's 18 millimeter, 1518. So very similar to Zan miniatures or of course AB
Maybe
miniatures, right?
miniature.
However, you know, because our proportions tend to be a little bit more realistic, I have lots of Old Glory miniatures and they still look fine because the Old Glory miniatures are so fat, even though they're like 16 or 17 mil, you know what I mean? So they fit very well within those lines. We're not trying to like cut out other companies. They just hook right in, especially to those lines. And yeah, so for Revolution with the game, we'll be releasing not just, you know, like the normal Revolution kind of armies you think of, but we're going to try to release like more interesting things, right? So we'll have, you know, the classic armies for both first and second coalition, France, Austria, and Britain to fight like the famous battles like Arcole, Marengo,
Mm.
even less famous, but I think still very important battles like Turcoing and Fleurus, or I'm not sure if that's pronounced correct, Fleurus,
Fleuris.
1794. Yeah, but these battles in the Netherlands and so on. But then we also want to do a lot more things that people don't see. So we want to do like the battle in the Pyrenees between France and Spain. We want to do the Rhine campaign with Prussia. Like a lot of people say that Valmy is just that's it for the Prussians, but there's a whole campaign there. Um, and then we also want to like do stuff that like no one has really done before, right? Like we want to do not just Napoleon in Egypt, but Napoleon was trying to try to get to India, right? And he was trying to fight with Tipu Sultan and basically the Indians there against none other than the Duke of Wellington, Arthur Wellesley. So the young Arthur Wellesley was in command in India at the time, right? So there's a potential for both the theoretical, but also real battles like the Battle of Assaye between like the Maratha and the British. And there's Egypt, of course, and we're going to expand our Ottoman line even more for that. It's already probably the biggest 18 millimeter Ottoman line, but it'll become even bigger. And yeah, we'd love to do even more than that because again, Revolution is it's really open-ended, right? I mean, we haven't talked about what's going on in Eastern Europe yet, but there's a lot going on in Eastern Europe. There's at least one Polish Revolution. There might be more, right? So there's a lot we'd like to do, and that's the nature of Kickstarter, right? Is like we're going to release the basics, but with people's support, we can do some really interesting things that no one has ever done before. And now you
Yes.
know that we can do it, right? Because we not only delivered a full Kickstarter in metal miniatures, it's already probably one of the biggest Lace Wars lines you can buy from. But now we're going to be doing something that's even bigger with you know an established production line, right? Because we create all the models in-house, like we own all the manufacturing.
Okay.
So
And you start to talk by the community, and
mhm.
you you volunteer to be close with the community. And when we start to talk about the apply, you say we are really you want to be really to react to the return of the
Mhm.
community. Perhaps you can talk more about that. Donc en fait, au début, lorsqu'on s'est parlé, ils ont beaucoup parlé du fait qu'ils voulaient quelque chose de très réactif au niveau de l'application et qui puisse adapter aussi en fonction des retours de la communauté. Donc j'aimerais un peu savoir qu'est-ce qu'ils ont derrière ça, comme enfin l'idée qu'ils ont derrière ça.
Well, I mean, we are about to run a big event this
Yeah.
weekend here in Ottawa. It's at Can Games, which is one of the biggest Canadian gaming conventions. So, in terms of I mean, partly the reason like we are doing the models and the game like together is so that people can participate and people can play and people can, yeah, immediately get going in the hobby without having to worry about, you know, what rule set am I using? What miniature am I using? What exactly am I painting? And things like
Mhm.
that. So we're always very focused on that and hope to support people, especially new players into the hobby. And hopefully, again, like with an app, with all these things that are a little bit closer to what video gamers, like people who play video games, are used to, that it would also be easier for them to do something, to start in the miniature wargaming community. But yeah, so we have the event that we're planning that's happening this weekend. So which is also going to be the launch of the Kickstarter, which is very exciting. Uh, and we will be doing all these multiplayer stuff and whatnot. So that's going to be cool. But in the future, I think it's always been part of our plan to, in addition to doing this as like a business, but definitely as a club, and keep like hosting events, running events, and, doing stuff like that.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of little things that the app also implies that help the community, right? Obviously, we've talked about um, just the idea that it's like a more accessible format for, I wouldn't even say for like a younger audience, because again, I know that like all the players like in their 60s, they're all on their phone, right? And so is it easier or harder for them to flip through a book with no index, or to click, I see exactly what the rule is, right? And it guides them through things, right? So I don't want to even say it's for younger people, because I see a lot of advantages. Oh, you can also make the screen text bigger, right?
That's true.
So little things like that. But let's take that even farther, right? Again, one of the big advantages is solo play. And again, you played a very rough tutorial, as I believe that we did. But okay, so traditionally you have to have kind of a friend generally tell you how to set things up and play the game. With this, you can just download the app. We will also have, as a measure of like making sure the community can grow as much as possible globally, we will be releasing a completely free print and play addition to the game. So if you just have the app, you can immediately print off like little model tokens and play the game. On top of that, again, the app will immediately walk you through the game, right? You don't have to have someone else explaining it to you. I mean, it probably helps. Like we're always about connecting with other people, but we don't see it as like, oh, okay, you solo players, you have your thing, this is great, go play it. Okay, now you as a solo player, if you actually do meet someone, or you have someone you might want to meet, you can say, oh, install the app, learn the tutorial, and like you can decide if you want to play more. And when we do meet, we're going to spend less time flipping through the rule book, because we have a greater understanding and a more unified understanding of how the game works, because the app standardizes and makes everyone's access to the rules more accessible. And you don't have to order from, the UK to get something 2 weeks later, like a rule book, right? Right. So there's a lot of little things. Like there's so many solo gamers in their basement, and yeah, maybe there'll always be a solo gamer, but if they know that they can just immediately show up and like, okay, we've both played the tutorial, right? We already kind of know how the game works. That's immediately faster. You have more of a connection with that other player, right? So we really hope things like that, things like the free print and play, can really expand the community, and also make other people, like organizers like yourself, have more tools to engage people that are like on the fence, or they're thinking of driving to your convention, right? Well, if they've like done that little bit extra, more kind of stuff, like, feature, they may be more engaged when they finally meet you, right?
Yes. So I think we present all your game. En fait, vous devez savoir que là, on fait l'enregistrement de la vidéo quelques jours avant le Kickstarter. Donc, quand la vidéo va sortir, le Kickstarter sera là. Donc, vous pourrez mettre en lien directement le Kickstarter. So I say, normally we record this interview few days before the start of the Kickstarter. So the Kickstarter, normally when the video are here, are in it's okay. You can go to the Kickstarter. So what's the perhaps you start to say what is the next with a different era, different period, different type of soldier you create. So what is your next project after this one? Perhaps just developed the era, or
I
very
think
different.
we'll definitely spend some time on this game and this era. Like we want to give it the opportunity to both for the models on Tundra Works side, to for you to the line of models. And also from the app side, again, even though this is now already a very playable game, this is definitely not where we're ending. We want to, like put out more, solo campaigns. We want to have
club games is a big
club games, big club games, so multiplayer. So
Multi-devices.
right now we only have 1v1, but eventually we want like 2v2, 3v3. We want interactions between players on the same side. So not just opposing side, but what if I have
Who's
a
the
slightly,
commander?
like even though we're both on the French side, I have a different commander. I have someone who has different objectives. I have a different set of cards. So we want to explore that as much as we can. So there's definitely a lot more coming with the game and the models with the Revolution era, at least for the coming year. I would say that's what we're planning. So we'll be focusing on this for the next year. And then after that, we definitely have ideas we have in mind to use. Obviously we have an app now. It can be used for different era, different periods of historical wargaming or even non-historical wargaming. So those ideas are definitely in our head.
Nice.
But yeah, I don't, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I want to connect this question, the last question is I talked about, because it's very important, the accessibility of the game. And that's very important in the community. We want to grow the community. That's always been super important to us. Again, we had an era where like we were just in public playing war games in front in university like every week.
Yep, we were at like one of in the lobbies of an engineering building, and like students come in and out all the time, and people stop to like talk, and no, it's great.
So we strongly believe in that. But I also have experience as an alpha and beta tester for several AAA gaming companies, and to me, another big advantage of this app is the continued support. So first thing before anyone asks, this is not a subscription game. It's not. It's not going to be. Part of the reason we have chosen Android for the game is because it's very sustainable in the long term to do it that way. So once you have the app, it's just your app. You own it. It's not a live service game. It's not a subscription game, which, as I probably should remind everyone, every other major app for like the game companies, like Games Workshop, is subscription based, right?
Yeah, so there is a one-time cost that comes with it, but just like you would buy a rule book, and it's definitely not more expensive than a rule book.
And to be fair, like there will be expansions to the rule book, but we've also looked at like what's common and what works in the market. So like our kind of what we look at is like the Paradox publishing system, where like one person can just have the basic game and another person can have some expansions. And then when you're playing, it's all compatible basically, right?
Multiplayer game, yeah.
And so you can kind of go to your friend and be like, oh, I really want like the big expansion for like the Polish independence revolution campaign. Okay, great. Well, now that I've seen this, like I really want this, so I'm gonna like
try it out,
get the expansion, right? So that's kind of gonna be the model. And an important aspect of that to keep things going long term is that we can do all sorts of things, right? So first of all, obviously, notre français, c'est juste okay. We speak kind of the government Ottawa French, which is to say not very good. But like the community feedback on the French translation is more important than any translation I can buy, right? Because it's so like specific to like wargaming, right? And as an app, I'm not limited to one print or a second print. I don't have to charge you, right? So as we engage the community, we'll be able to live patch the game just like a video game for historical accuracy, for balance, and for translation, let alone like rules FAQs, right? So that's a major part of the game in the long term. And just like the miniatures, we're very focused on quality, right? Like for us, this is like a reputation, a community project. And so we're going to be making sure that we're spending time updating the game, keeping it living, right? In the same way that when we supported Sam's projects, we were saying, this is a living community, so we're going to create content for him, right? Just for free. And similarly, like every time we release a content pack, there will be like free content additions so that you can be like, oh, I'm kind of interested in playing this again. I want to try this new scenario that we added for free, right? So that's going to be a constant part to keep the game alive. Going back to your point, Cynthia, about other periods, and of course, as everyone wants to know, I really want to stress that we're not thinking too much of that right now because this is a huge project, and there's a lot we can do. Again, we haven't talked about the fact that there's a ton of things going on in the Americas. There's a tons of things going on in the Middle East and Asia in this period, right? There's a lot of things we could do. Without even talking about like whether we want to do the Napoleonic Wars properly, which I'm like, maybe, or
Yes.
maybe a specific part of it. But we do have a plan for a series, right? It's not something that we're focused on too much, but there will be a series, and I can say the first thing that series will be a World War II game, but it will be something that's much more radically different than even this game.
Yes, of course.
Right? It'll be something so different, and we're not even sure if it will be on Kickstarter.
Mhm.
Like it might be, but it might be something that and I will say that again, we have a lot of experience, not experience, but connection with like the kind of like the national Flames of War community in Canada. Like so it will be something that appeals to like veteran Flames of War players.
But it will be different enough.
It will be very
We don't
different.
want to just take over.
Yes.
Yeah, we want to give something new.
Yes, it's kind of like Steam, like Valve, the company. Like if it's not super different, we're not interested in doing it. So it's going to be something that is very different, and it will also take the time. So it's
Yeah.
no rush, and we'll
No.
be taking the time to play test it. Because when I say that, like, oh, this app seems very different, you're right. At the end of the day, it does have a lineage, right? Like we've worked with Sam Mustafa and some other similar games. So you can kind of see the progression here. And in some cases, we actively chose not to change things because we're like, oh, too much has changed already. Like let's like make this part something someone already knows and then add the simultaneousness on top. For the other release, we'll probably take things even further and make it like a radically different experience.
We're trying to
And
push the envelope further.
yeah, that will take more time
Yeah.
to think about, right?
Okay.
That's pretty far down the
And we
line.
will definitely also make sure that as from the miniature side, that the miniatures that come for that will be something very fresh. They will not be your standard D-Day release. They will be
Super.
something radically different.
Just minutes. Yes, just
No worries.
so super for the next project, but I think you are a lot of job actually. Perhaps it's for that. It's difficult to see in the future for the World War II or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. I think we
Yeah.
want to emphasize that, and it's easy for somebody to kind of like put things on the wall, right? But remember that we also do all the manufacturing.
Yeah.
So
Yes, of course.
even this game was ready to play in one form over a year ago.
No, at least 2 years ago.
Okay, it's been
Yeah.
a while.
The
Yeah, it's
very
2 years ago.
test we run with this game was a long
Yeah,
time.
we ran an event with like 10 people like 2 years
But
ago.
I was like, yeah.
But like we wanted to
It's
like
changed a lot since then already.
evolve things more because we care about the quality, but we also, yeah, we wanted to make sure there's a full miniatures release that comes with it.
Super. So I think it's finished for the presentation. Thanks
Great.
together for explain uh all your stuff. Also to explain why you create this game, the specificity, and all what you talk about. You also how you can pass to player to crew to create the rule. So how many times a Quickstarter stay in the online? I think it's 1 month, more or less, something like
It's
that.
30 days, so it'll be 30 days from this weekend,
Yes,
and we'll provide you the link, obviously. And you're also basically the catalog that's coming out. We have
yes.
pictures of
So you
miniatures
can
and we're scanning right now. So
the, you can check on Quickstarter, you can check also on your Facebook page. Donc, vous pouvez aller voir
yeah,
sur
under
leur
course.
Kickstarter, sur la page Facebook où ils publient des photos de l'évolution aussi, un peu de la règle, etc. Donc, n'hésitez pas à aller voir. So you can go to the website for on Facebook to see because you publish a photo and evolution of the rules. So you can use this.
Yeah, and I guess it's
That.
important to mention that even though the models will take some time to deliver from the Kickstarter, even though we did deliver early, again, it's crazy. Um, the beta to play the app will be almost right away. Now
Mm.
there's a technical rollout, right? Like some people will be like, oh, well, like this hasn't been released for this platform yet. But for the standard Android user, the release will be almost immediate.
Yeah.
Mm.
So once the Kickstarter ends, you don't have to wait a whole year. People will start getting early access to the game, the app itself, like right away. And we will start rolling out
Super.
immediately.
Super. So perhaps see you soon, and
Yeah,
good luck
for sure.
for the Revolution
Yeah, please
game.
visit us on Kickstarter. Help us make really exciting new model lines. Et tu
Yes.
peux aider moi avec mon français. Voilà.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank. Bye bye.
Merci.
Bye. Merci.